We've reached the end of another event-filled week. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your video update for May 30th, 2025 to catch you up on some of these developments. And it has been quite extraordinary what's happening. Let me focus on the big question, which is, can diplomacy work? Scott Ritter at the Schiller Conference made a very strong push for dialogue, which resonated with the officials and diplomats on the panel, as well as with the majority in the Schiller Institute Zoom audience. But the question keeps coming up. Isn't it a utopian fantasy to believe that diplomacy can work in the face of the outright evil coming from the British and the war hawks in the West? So how do you answer that? Let's take it from the top. First, consider the alternative. We've seen what's happened with these wars. Continued destruction of an ability of a nation to take care of its population. The destruction of both sides or all sides in the war. The loss of income from the fighting, from the destruction. The shutdown of vital industry and services, the cuts in healthcare, the cuts in education that are necessary to fill the budgets for the war. So the problem then becomes not, is it possible to make a change, but who will make a change? And that's where the issue of the people, the populations taking a stand, a strong stand, and making it known to their leaders that they will not tolerate this kind of waste in the resources of a nation. That's the crucial question here. So we start by saying, what is the alternative to diplomacy? Well, it's death and destruction, permanent war. And we see from the United Kingdom, from France, from Merz in Germany, from the leaders of the Baltic nations, the European Union, the NATO countries, a willingness to continue these wars. When Trump and Putin are engaging in negotiations to normalize relationship and to end the wars, the push from Europe is heavily weighted toward continuing the fighting with no resolution until Russia surrenders, which is not going to happen. We saw this at the UN Security Council hearing yesterday, where there was dramatic presentations from Europe as to how they're going to continue the war. Now, the question is, do the people in those nations who are suffering from the effects of a financial commitment to war, are they willing to continue to suffer? Do they know what their leaders are saying? And if they do, is there a mechanism for them to fight it? And that's the question that comes up. What's clear is that there is a solution. The Russians have put forward a document on the terms for the signing of a ceasefire with Ukraine. And this will now be discussed on June 2nd. What will the United States say about this? Will Trump push the Ukrainians to accept it? Will the Russians allow the Ukrainians to accept it? Will the Ukrainians show the sense of not wishing to be committing self-suicide? Will they show the sense to sign the agreement? Now, those are the questions that should be raised, not is there any way out of this? Of course there's a way out of it, but it depends on what people are willing to do to fight to change the way they approach these situations. Now, meanwhile, the question of will Trump continue to insist that Ukraine accept these terms? That's one question. Another question is just how crazy is Zelensky? He was in Berlin yesterday meeting with Merz to discuss German-Ukraine joint production of missiles, to discuss the deployment of the Taurus missile. Well, there was no report on whether there was agreement or not. Merz has been making a big point of his willingness to continue to push for the use of the Taurus missile, which has a range which can go pretty far into Russia. And that's what they were talking about, how to take the war to Russia. Now, meanwhile, Mirotvorets, which is the assassination hit team working in the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, but really a NATO subsidiary that puts out a target list of people who have to be eliminated, has now put Medinsky, who is one of the chief Russian negotiators, and his family on that list. Is the United States going to accept that? Are they going to allow that to take place? So where we see a wave of assassinations in the last week, are we going to sit back and allow the Ukrainians to take out the family of the leader of the Russian negotiating team? That's a question for the viewers, for the population to answer. I don't know what will happen. We do know that these terror teams and hit teams are very active. Now in Gaza, the Israeli assault is continuing, even as reports have emerged from Qatar that negotiations have proceeded toward a ceasefire, that Israel now says it accepts the ceasefire agreement and it's up to Hamas. Well, that would be something quite useful. The question many of you pose is, can we trust Netanyahu to do anything he says he's going to do? Well, you can't trust necessarily. As Ronald Reagan famously said, trust but verify. The U.S. has to put pressure on Netanyahu if you expect Netanyahu to go along with an agreement that goes against his desire to destroy Palestine. So this is where it's up to the American people to put pressure on the Trump administration to give Trump the backup that's needed to put pressure on Netanyahu. The only way to stop this war against the people of Gaza is if the United States threatens to withdraw support for Israel. So in each of these cases, Ukraine and Gaza, there has to be a peace movement that mobilizes to put pressure on politicians who otherwise are completely under control of the military-industrial complex, the war hawks, the neocons, whatever you want to call them, the forces committed to permanent warfare. The question then ultimately is, what of the people, the American people, the people of Europe, the people of Israel? There have been some very strong statements from leaders in Israel, including former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, against Netanyahu and against the war. Will they get backing from the population? That's the key issue. And that's where you come in. That's where the listeners and viewers of these daily podcasts come in. Will you take responsibility for acting to end these wars? So if you want to, you can do it. Today at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, at 5 p.m. Central European Time, we'll have the weekly Zoom call of the International Peace Coalition. I would urge you to go to the SchillerInstitute.com website and find the link for the call, or take the link I'm going to put in the description section so that you can join the deliberation and the discussion about how to have a peace movement that moves governments that are otherwise committed to war and destruction. It's really up to you, up to us, to all of us, to change the dynamic in the world. So thanks for joining me this week. Take a look at the various programs we have on the website, and I'll see you again on Monday. But make sure over the weekend you're playing a role on behalf